Well, a good afternoon to all of you, and a special thanks to Julian for asking me to speak to you today. Of course, it's a very special day today, as it is the anniversary of the Sydney Day, and Julian has already read out the meaning of that during the meditation. Well, it happens to be a very special day for me in addition to that, because when Julian first asked me to speak today, I remembered that today would be the 81st anniversary of my first darshan of Sri Aurobindo and Mother. It was 81 years ago today that my parents took me to have a first darshan of Sri Aurobindo and Mother. They had read books by Sri Aurobindo before that, and taking me with them, I was 4 years old then, we had our first darshan. And I say darshan advisedly because, of course, it's a two-way process, one in which I saw Mother and Sri Aurobindo, but of course, they saw me too. And I'm not sure which of the two is the more important. I think it's Mother seeing me that was the more important part of that. Before I start talking about my story, I think it's important to remind myself, and indeed all of you, that Sri Aurobindo and Mother's yoga is characterized by a very unique personal relationship between them and their disciples. This one is going to be my story, and each of you, I'm sure, will undoubtedly have your own. But I hope also to touch on some general principles of the yoga as I have received them. So my story begins more than 80 years ago when I first had darshan of Sri Aurobindo and Mother during the 24th November 1943 darshan, when I was a little over 4 years old. Later, from when I was 7 years old, my parents came with me and we joined the ashram as ashramites. From that age, from that point on, I spent the formative years of my life up to the age of 22 in the ashram, mainly as a student, but also working. And this was also a time when Mother was at her most physically active. So this was a very good period to be there. The second phase of my life came from 1962 to 69, when I was a student of science in Britain at the University of St. Andrews. The third phase came after that, when I spent my professional life as a university professor of physics in Kingston, Ontario, Canada, which was followed by my retirement in 2007, since when we have divided our time between the ashram and Toronto, where my children live. My relationship with Sri Aurobindo and the Mother was the determining factor in all the important choices that I have made in my life. And my purpose today is to give you a brief picture of this relationship, in which Mother's physical presence was ultimately, her physical presence, I say, was ultimately material. I must, however, start with a word of warning. Please do not give too much importance to my story insofar as it relates to your own journey. I've already told you about the uniqueness of the relationship. In this connection, let me quote Sri Aurobindo. He has said, "The idea of helping others is a subtle form of the ego. It is only the divine force that can help. One can be its instrument, but you should first learn to be a fit and egoless instrument." And he has written, and I quote again, "A fully developed sadhak can be an instrument of the Mother for helping others, but a fully developed sadhak means one who is free from ego, and he would never claim the work as his own. In this ashram," Sri Aurobindo said, "all helping has recoiled on the helper by either making him egoistic or by getting affected with the very thing one is helping the other to get rid of. Mother has also pointed out that it is neither desirable nor possible to try to assess one's own progress. I quote Mother, "It is always preferable not to try to assess the progress one is making, because it does not help one to make it. On the contrary, aspiration for progress, if it is sincere, is sure to have an effect. But whatever the progress made, individually or collectively, the progress still remaining to be made is so considerable that there is no reason to stop on the way to assess the ground one has covered. The perception that some progress has been made should come spontaneously by the sudden and unexpected awareness of what one is in comparison with what one was some time before. That is all, but that in itself requires a fairly high degree of development of the consciousness." End of quote. So let me start at the beginning. As I've said, I first saw Sri Aurobindo and Mother on the Darshan Day in 1943. At the time, I was just over 4 years old and have no particular recollection of the event. But that evening, after Darshan had closed and we were relaxing in our rented apartment, an emissary came and called out my name. Sri Aurobindo had sent me a book inscribed with "To Binu with blessings, Sri Aurobindo," in his handwriting. This was a little booklet called The Brain of India. The rest of the story comes from my parents. Obviously, I was too young to remember what happened then. Apparently, I turned a few pages of the book and said something to the effect that I did not understand anything. The emissary went away, but he was back next morning. Apparently, what I had said had been reported to Sri Aurobindo. And he had said something along the following lines. Obviously, I've heard this from my parents, so I should not be actually quoting it, but this is the gist of what he said, what I was told. He had said, "Binu should be told that Mother's and my books are not meant to be understood. He should read our books from time to time with a quiet mind, and as he develops, he will get more and more from them. We are working on him directly through our books. He should never ask anyone to explain what we have written." Now, there are 3 different parts to this very important message. And these have been supported by some other sayings of Mother and Sri Aurobindo. The Mother, on the 25th of November 1961, said, and I quote, "To come closer to the truth, you must often accept not to understand." End of quotation. Mother has also repeatedly told us that Sri Aurobindo's writings should be read with a silent mind. I quote from what Mother told us during her Wednesday class of 19 September 1958. In a general and this is the quote, "In a general and almost absolute way, if you truly wish to profit from these readings, as from all of Sri Aurobindo's writings, the best method is this. Having gathered your consciousness and focused your attention on what you are reading, you must establish a minimum of mental tranquility. The best thing would be to obtain perfect silence and achieve a state of immobility of the mind, immobility of the brain. I might say so that the attention becomes as still and immobile as a mirror, like the surface of absolutely still water. Then what one has read passes through the surface and penetrates deep into the being, where it is received with a minimum of distortion. Afterwards, sometimes long afterwards, it wells up again from the depths and manifests in the brain with its full power of comprehension, not as knowledge acquired from outside, but as a light one carried within. In this way, the faculty of understanding is at its highest, whereas if, while you read, the mind remains agitated and tries to understand at once what it is reading, you lose more than 3/4 of the force, the knowledge, and the truth contained in the words. And if you are able to refrain from asking questions until this process of absorption and inner awakening is completed, well, then you will find that you have far fewer questions to ask because you will have a better understanding of what you have read. End of quote. And I will cut the ground a little bit from under my own feet by this next quote from the mother. On the 9th of January, 1938, Mother wrote, and I quote, "It is always better not to listen to talks, especially on so-called spiritual matters. Each one must follow his own way, and the others have nothing to do with it." Again, in support of what I've been talking about, during the 1960s, I was studying in Britain and became a member of the then Sri Aurobindo Center, London. At that time, this was a unique center which had been started by the mother. And when in 1966, I was going to Pondicherry for a short vacation, I was tasked by the members to ask Mother for advice on what should be done at center meetings. I did so, and Mother's answer was that we should read Sri Aurobindo's and Mother's books and follow with a short meditation, but that there should be no discussion on what had been read. Mother smilingly added that perhaps a dictionary might be helpful when reading Sri Aurobindo. Again, we see an injunction against any mental discussion of their works. Sri Aurobindo's writings, of course, often have references to past traditions and practices, as well as mythological references, and I find that some help with references may be helpful. Finally, I would add that during my years in the ashram from 1946 to 1962, I do not recall anyone being given a chance to explain any of Sri Aurobindo or Mother's works, except for talks by Mother herself. I will go on to my next big experience with the mother. She gave a great importance to birthdays. And she has said, and I quote, "It is truly a special day in one's life. It is one of the days in the year when the Supreme descends into us, or when we are face to face with the Eternal. One of those days when our soul comes in contact with the Eternal, and if we remain a little conscious, we can feel His presence within us. If we make a little effort on this day, we accomplish the work of many lives, as in a lightning flash. That is why I give so much importance to the birthday, because what one gains in one day is truly something incomparable. And it is for this too that I too work to open the consciousness a little upward, and so that one may come face to face with the Eternal. My child, it is a very, very special day, for it is the day of decision, the day when one can truly make a tremendous progress, when one can unite with the Supreme Consciousness. For on this day, the Lord lifts us up to the highest possible region so that our soul, which is a portion of this eternal flame, can unite with it and absorb from the source. This day is truly an opportunity in life. This quote is taken from the book Sweet Mother Luminous Notes. It was mother's practice to give sadhaks several opportunities to have her blessings on birthdays. On my 12th birthday, I got a very significant boon from mother. I'd heard that several children had the privilege of going up to mother's room and spending time with her, and so I asked her if I too could come. No, said mother, you do not need to come to me, as you should be able to find me within yourself. I will help you to do that. From that point on, I gradually developed the ability of communicating with her within myself. But Sri Aurobindo and mother both encouraged sadhaks to write to them about problems and difficulties. And Sri Aurobindo particularly spent a great deal of time replying to letters, as I'm sure all of you have found out by now. Both of them have pointed out that often the very act of writing sends a communication and results in an immediate effect. Mother has added that it does not matter what language it is written in. When asked why it was necessary to write when he and mother are supposed to know all that happens to us, Sri Aurobindo replied, and I quote, "It is necessary for you to be conscious and to put your self-observation before us. It is on that that we can act. A mere action on our observation without any corresponding consciousness on the part of the sadhak would lead to nothing." And again, another quotation, he says, and I quote, "It is an undoubted fact, proved by hundreds of instances, that for many, the exact statement of their difficulties to us is the best, and often, though not always, an immediate and even an instantaneous means of release. This has often been seen by sadhaks not only here, but far away, and not only for inner difficulties, but for illness and outer pressure of unfavorable circumstances. But for that, a certain attitude is necessary, either a strong faith in the mind and vital, or a habit of reception and response in the inner being." By the way, all of these quotations are to be found in the combined works of Sri Aurobindo and mother. And if any of you wish to have a particular reference, you can always email me, and I'll give you the email address at the end, and I can send it to you. Sri Aurobindo was asked, "Why do you lay so much stress on writing everything to you? Can't we pray to you and ask for help? Isn't it as good as writing?" Sri Aurobindo's reply was stern. I quote, "Not writing means trying to conceal. That is a suggestion of the vital." End of quote. I've mentioned this question of writing because if we are not confident of being able to communicate with the mother within you, then this helps. And the important thing, as I said, is not the sending of the letter, it is the writing of it. That itself lets them know whatever they need to know. Another great favor, perhaps the greatest that I received from mother, came in 1968. I was then a few months from finishing my PhD at St. Andrews in Scotland. I went to Pondicherry and went to see mother as usual. And mother asked me and startled me if I wanted to get married. I knew that my parents had been wanting to get me married for some time and had been sending mother photos of possible matches. Mother had asked me the same question back in 1966, when I'd also come from Britain on a visit. On my saying that I was not interested, she had returned a batch of photographs that I then returned to my parents. At the back of my mind, I still had the idea that I would finish my studies and return to the ashram and teach there after spending some time in scientific research. Well, this time in 1968 also, I stammered a negative answer. And I was taken aback when mother continued, "But I want you to get married," she said. And handing me a photograph, she said, "Ruma will be a good wife for you and a good daughter for me." I had made no plans for getting married. I was living a single life on a student fellowship. And above all, I had planned on returning to the ashram, and this must have shown on my face. Let me just remind you again of what she said. She said, "Ruma will be a good wife for you and a good daughter for me." But when she saw my face, I think she understood the surprise that I had. She looked at me and she said, "But Binu, for spiritual reasons, you don't have to be here, as I will come to you wherever you are. And if I need you here, I will give you an unmistakable indication." And thus, mother gave me two boons together. Life changed in a hurry, and after all arrangements were made, mother married us on Christmas Eve in 1968, with Ruma wearing a sari and blouse that mother had worn earlier and given to her. I soon discovered that she had a strong aspiration and a deep inner contact with the mother. And getting married to me was clearly mother's method of getting Ruma into her world. Our marriage has made our lives immeasurably happier, and we've been conscious of getting mother's help and blessings throughout our life together. A small, interesting story about the mother here. Ruma and I had to have a full social marriage in Kolkata later, as many of our relatives on both sides were not connected with the world of Sri Aurobindo and the mother. As a Brahmin by caste, such a marriage would require me to have a sacred thread. Now, the one person I knew that flaunted his sacred thread in the ashram was Champaklal, who many of you will know as Sri Aurobindo and mother's personal servitor. And he liked me from my childhood, and my father suggested that he could arrange to give me a sacred thread in a small ceremony, perhaps. However, when I asked him, he became very annoyed, as he thought that mother's children had no need of sacred threads. Fair enough, but I was in a quandary. So I asked mother what to do, and do you know what happened? Mother called Champaklal and asked him to prepare a sacred thread, and when that was ready, mother gave it to me with her blessings. So that was that. Another interesting story about mother. In the midst of my studies in Britain, when I was planning a visit to Pondicherry in 1966, I asked mother if I could bring something for mother's personal use. I got a reply from Pavitrada telling me that mother liked a perfume made by Yardley's of London called Bond Street. On both my visits in 66 and 68, I took a bottle for mother, and she seemed delighted. Imagine this, a mother with a French background liking an English perfume. Well, after our marriage, I got Ruma a bottle of the same perfume, and we found that it had an Eastern accent, largely based on jasmine. After that, we moved to Canada, and when I was visiting Britain in 1975, I thought that I would get another bottle for Ruma. I went to Yardley's main store in Bond Street, only to find that they had stopped making this line of perfumes and waters at the end of 1973. That was just around when mother left her body. Well, my contacts with mother were special, perhaps unique in one respect. That was in the encouragement that I received from mother to pursue my studies in science, and later a career in scientific research, and the relation of this to my yoga of self-development. Usually it is thought that religion and science are opposed to each other. And many in the ashram have brought that attitude with them and still have it. But I had a predilection for science and mathematics from my young days. I disliked emotion, and if I was unhappy at any time, I would love to retreat into the perfectly rational world of mathematics. But humans have mostly thought of, as I said, of science and reason as being in opposition to religion. And scientists too have often pointed out the faults of religion. In Sri Aurobindo's writings, one finds a lot of critique of the inefficiency, insufficiency, and failings of science and reason to show the need to go above reason in the climb towards the supermind. But he and Mother have also strongly written about the need for us humans to base ourselves on reason. I will first give you some quotations and then tell you of some of the things that Mother told me. Mother's liking for science came from the importance that she gave to reason as the basis of human life and science and mathematics' role in developing it. And she appreciated the fact that both in science and spirituality, the object was the same, a search for truth. So I give you a series of quotations here from Mother and Sri Aurobindo. In a Wednesday class of 8th May 1957, well, perhaps I should interject here that during my stay in the ashram, Mother's Wednesday classes took place in the 1950s. That was when I was in the ashram. And one of my jobs there was to tape all of Mother's Wednesday classes. So these classes, as you know them today, were originally taped by me. Anyway, to get back to reason. In her Wednesday class of 8th May 1957, Mother said, "It is a good thing to begin to learn at an early age that to lead an efficient life and obtain from one's body the maximum it is able to give, reason must be the master of the house." And it is not a question of yoga or higher realization. It is something which should be taught everywhere, in every school, every family, every home. Man was made to be a mental being. And merely to be a man, we're not speaking of anything else. We are speaking only of being a man. Life must be dominated by reason and not by vital impulses. This should be taught to all children from their infancy. If one is not dominated by reason, one is a brute lower than the animal. For animals don't have a mind or a reason to dominate them, but they do obey the instinct of the species. And therefore, the first thing which should be taught to every human being as soon as he is able to think is that they should obey reason, which is a super instinct of the species. Reason is the master of the nature of mankind. One must obey reason and absolutely refuse to be a slave of instincts. And here I'm not talking to you about yoga. I'm not talking about spiritual life, not at all. It has nothing to do with that. It is the basic wisdom of human life, purely human life. Every human being who obeys anything other than reason is a kind of brute lower than the animal. That's all. And this should be taught everywhere. It is the basic education which should be given to children. The reign of reason must come to an end only with the advent of the psychic law which manifests the divine will. End of quote. Following that earlier quotation, Mother had been asked in class, "Mother, how do we develop reason?" And Mother had said, and I don't have the quote in front of me, but she had said that reason could only be developed by using it. And one of the places where one does have to use it, of course, is in science and mathematics. Another quotation, this time from Sri Aurobindo, writing about the importance of the mind. He writes, this is from volume 13 of his collected works. The visible imperfections and limitations of mind in the present stage of its evolution here, we take as part of its very nature. But in fact, the boundaries in which it is still penned are only temporary limits and measures of its full, but in fact, the measures in which it is still, the boundaries in which it is still penned are only temporary limits and measures of its still incomplete evolutionary advance. Its defects of methods and means are faults of its immaturity and not proper to the constitution of its being. Its achievement, although extraordinary under hampering conditions, let me see, I'm not reading this right. Let me read this line again, just a second. The visible imperfections and limitations of mind in the present stage of its evolution here, we take as part of its very nature. But in fact, the boundaries in which it is still penned are only temporary limits and measures of its still incomplete evolutionary advance. Its defects of methods and means are faults of its immaturity and not proper to the constitution of its being. Its achievement, although extraordinary under the hampering conditions of the mental being being weighed down by its instrumentation in an earthly body, is far below and not beyond what will be possible to it in its illumined future. For mind is not in its very nature an inventor of errors, a father of lies bound down to a capacity of falsehood. Again, let me read that, sorry. For mind is not in its very nature an inventor of errors, a father of lies bound down to a capacity of falsehood, wedded to its own mistakes, and the leader of a stumbling life, as it too largely is at present, owing to our human shortcomings. It is in its origin a principle of light, an instrument put forth from the supermind, and though set to work within limits, and even set to create limits, yet the limits are luminous borders for a special working, voluntary and purposive bounds, a service of the finite, ever extending itself under the eye of infinity. It is this character of mind that will reveal itself under the touch of supermind and make human mentality an adjunct and minor instrumentation of the supramental knowledge. It will even be possible for the mind, no longer limited by the intellect, to become capable of a sort of mental gnosis, a luminous reproduction of the truth in a diminished working, extending the power of the light not only to its own, but to lower levels of consciousness in their climb towards self-transcendence. Overmind, intuition, illumined mind, and what I have called higher mind, these and other levels of a spiritualized and liberated mentality will be able to reflect in the uplifted human mind and its purified and exalted feeling and force of life and action something of their powers and prepare the ascent of the soul to their own plateaus and peaks of an ascending existence. This is essentially the change which can be contemplated as a result of the new evolutionary order, and it would mean a considerable extension of the evolutionary field itself and will answer the question of the result on humanity of the advent of supermind into the earth nature. In 1962, in the agenda, Mother commented on one of Sri Aurobindo's aphorisms, and she has said, and this is taken from the agenda, for a very long time, I quote, for a very long time, it seemed to me that if a perfect union could be achieved between the scientific approach carried to its extreme, and the spiritual approach carried to its extreme realization of if both could be joined, we would naturally obtain the truth we are seeking, the total truth. But with the two experiences that we have had, the experience of external life with universalization, impersonalization, in short, all the yogic experiences that one can have in the physical body, and on the other hand, the experience of total and perfect union with the origin. Now that I've had these two experiences, and that something has happened which I cannot describe yet, I know that the knowledge of the two and the union of the two is not enough, that they lead to a third thing, and that it is this third thing which is in the making in course of elaboration. It is this third thing that can lead to the realization, to the truth we seek. Yet the formula will come, I know, but it will come through a series of experiences that must be lived and which I have not yet had. There are more quotes along these lines, and in one of them, Mother has said, for example, that the spiritual path alone will not get to the truth, etc. But this one that I read to you from the agenda was her last comment along these lines. Let me add to this a personal perspective and some of Mother's advice to me personally. A very interesting point is that when one pursues mathematics and science to its limit, even by relying fully on reason, one can prove that there are problems that cannot be solved by reason alone. This is something that one does not come across in undergraduate science even. But when one goes beyond it, then one discovers that this has actually happened in many fields. That reason itself has shown that reason alone cannot prove everything. For example, in mathematics, there is Gödel's theorem. Of course, I don't have the time here to go into more specifics, but there is a very interesting book called The Outer Limits of Reason by Professor N.S. Janowski, where the author has shown the limitations of reason in various scientific fields and ends with a brief chapter on beyond reason. Thus, the pursuit of science and mathematics to its limit shows us the limitations of reason and the need to go beyond it. Now, Sri Aurobindo, of course, has told us about the need to go beyond reason, but knowing this limitation obtained by using reason itself means that the mind naturally goes quiet when one is dealing with matters beyond its ken. On the few occasions that I was able to get Mother's view on science, or let me just say this before that, in the ashram, in the school, it was very unstructured. But basically, as one went to higher and higher classes, one used to specialize in lesser subjects, as happens everywhere. But normally, one at that point would join the workforce, and some would want to leave studies completely and join the workforce. This was the days of when I was there. This is not the case now when students come from outside just to get a certificate and go back. And they are given certificates. There were no certificates in my time. There wasn't even a syllabus. But as we went to higher and as required, higher and higher classes were provided. And as I said, people would from time to time leave their studies, join a department or the other for work. And it's interesting that in a couple of cases, I came to know that Mother had said to them that they could leave their studies, but that they should carry on with mathematics and science for as long as they could. Let me go back to my script here. On the few occasions when I was able to get Mother's view on science, she pointed to other benefits that can be developed when indulging in scientific research, and these she asked me to observe. First and foremost, of course, was one's own inner development of reason. But these also included the development of modesty and the resultant decrease of ego that comes from the way that research is carried out in practice. You know, in a university, but also elsewhere, research is rarely done on one's own. One has colleagues. First of all, one builds on the knowledge that has been provided by a lot of others. Then one collaborates with colleagues, one collaborates with students and research associates, and the end result is a combined result. And in fact, in scientific literature, we are prohibited from using the first person singular. We have to write in the first person plural. Otherwise, the papers are not accepted for publication. So it is a thing that we accept for collaboration and other things that come from that. That includes the development of modesty and the resultant decrease of ego that comes from the way research is carried out in practice. She was happy that I had chosen to do experimental physics, as she thought that this would teach me how to observe properly and understand its limitations. She took pains to explain to me that most people do not have the ability to understand what they observe or how they should treat what they observe. She also gave importance to the mind's developing detachment. And she said that the nature of scientific research developed detachment with a consequent reduction in ego. She also quoted Sri Aurobindo as having said that to obtain the deepest truth about anything, one needed the maximum detachment from it. I will finish this subject with an interesting piece of advice that I received from Mother as an application of the advice of developing detachment. When I was an undergraduate student in Britain, before I had graduated, I used to have summer vacations. And I had a summer job at the BBC. Although this was on the technical side at first, as I've explained to you in the ashram, I had been in charge of recording all of Mother's Wednesday classes. And I did a few other things with electronics and so on. The BBC there, they soon found out my interest in world affairs and gave me work as an apprentice political correspondent. When I graduated in 1965, I was offered full-time employment by them as a correspondent. My original intention had been to pursue scientific research and get a PhD, but this offer from the BBC was also very tempting. So I asked Mother about it. I had gone in 1966, having finished undergraduate studies. Before starting graduate work, I went to see Mother. And I asked Mother what I should do. Oh, she said, do your PhD in physics first, because that will help you to become a much better correspondent. She explained the absolute need of detachment in studying politics and how I would learn that detachment from doing scientific research. As an example, she said that if I wanted to study India, I must first be able to forget that I'm an Indian. The Mother has also spoken elsewhere about how detachment helps to reduce one's ego. There is one final topic that I would wish to address today. That is the question of living outside the ashram and getting Mother's help. I'm not going to have a lot of time to tell you about all that has passed in our life here in Canada. In the ashram, of course, life is very well organized, and one bathes in a very special atmosphere diffused with Mother's grace. One hardly has to think of the direction of one's lives, and one encounters few problems that need specific help from the Mother. That is not the case outside the ashram. One is continuously encountering choices and decisions have to be made, big and small. There are pressures at work, at home, in society, etc. So one needs much more frequent help and advice from the Mother. But we have found that through all of our life here, her help has been available. There are two issues here. One is that our own attitude should not change. What do I mean by that? I will give you an example. At work, if we consecrate our work to the mother, as we do, for example, in the ashram, if we do the same here, this brings its own results, even in terms of outside appreciation. Thus, the more consciously that let me see. The more consciously that I dedicated my research to the mother, the more successful were the results and the better the outer appreciation. But secondly, there is the more difficult question of recognizing mother's help. This is because mother does not normally do her work in any magical way. All the laws of nature are part of her creation, and she uses them to manipulate outer circumstances in such a way as to obtain the result that she chooses for you. If one has different paths from which one has to choose, one may find that all except one get closed due to circumstances, and only one possibility is left going forward. And one may not immediately understand the value of this choice until much later. Sometimes, when I refer a question to mother before going to sleep, I may wake up in the morning with an idea that solves the problem. But we do not always recognize that the idea has come as a result of mother's intervention, and often its beneficial results do not appear until later, and then our hearts are filled with gratitude towards her. Another reason for our particular gratitude to Mother was for the kind of people that we've encountered in our lives, people who gave us their love and affection, and people from whom we could learn a lot. But I should not get carried away. I think it is getting close to the time to stop. I shall end with a favorite prayer of mine written by the mother in French and translated into English by Sri Aurobindo. I understand also that this was one of his favorites. Many of you may know this. Glory to thee, O Lord, who triumphest over every obstacle. Grant that nothing in us shall be an obstacle to thy work. Grant that nothing may retard thy manifestation. Grant that thy will may be done in all things and at every moment. We stand here before thee that thy will may be fulfilled in us, in every element, in every activity of our being, from our supreme heights to the smallest cells of the body. Grant that we may be faithful to thee utterly and forever. We should be completely under thy influence to the exclusion of every other. Grant that we may never forget to own towards thee a deep and intense gratitude. Grant that we may never squander any of the marvelous things that are thy gifts to us at every instant. Grant that everything in us may collaborate in thy work and all be ready for thy realization. Glory to thee, O Lord, supreme master of all realization. Give us a faith active and ardent, absolute and unshakable in thy victory. Thank you all very much.
Wonderful choices, Binu. We're so grateful for your selection of quotes and for taking us to Pondicherry and to be in that atmosphere is such a blessing. I'm fortunate that my wife had Mother's Darshan, but it's a privilege I did not have. And for you to have been in the presence of Sri Aurobindo and Mother and some of the great sadhaks like Pavitra It's wonderful to hear these stories. Would you have just a few more minutes to take some questions before
Yes,
we...
certainly. Yes, yes. I'm not hearing you very loudly, so please speak up.
Okay, so I turn it on. If anyone wants to unmute or tap a question into the chat, please go ahead. Binu, I posted the link to the book that you mentioned. And would you like me to post your email address in case someone wants the quotes?
Please do so. I'll be happy to respond to any question that one has on email afterwards too. Yes.
So I was wondering, when you mentioned about the two choices, like when one lives outside in the world, like if you could elaborate a bit more with maybe an example or something, like on the second choice that you mentioned, like all paths, like how to receive the mother's decision, like if you are confused regarding a decision, and how to perceive mother's.
Well, for example, if one has a lot of choices and one leaves it and one offers it to the mother, you often find we have, what has happened to us is that we have often found that the choices gradually disappear and we're left with only one possibility. So we don't really have to choose. She has already done the choosing for us. But you see, we have to recognize it as such. It is sometimes difficult for us to recognize it. We think, because mother, all action in the universe, whether it be any action in any concrete way, and as I said, even scientific action and so on, all action is her work. And she can manipulate. She does not work beyond the laws of nature. She will use the laws of nature to manipulate the circumstances around you. I'll give you one simple example. When I came first to Canada, I was brought here by a professor whom I had met in the UK when I was doing my PhD. In fact, he had offered me this job within 1 year of my starting, because he had only come there on a sabbatical for a year. When he came back, he said, Binu, when you finish, I'll have a job waiting for you. I've never had to look for a job in my life. Mother has always had them lined up. But when I came here as a postdoc, which is not a permanent position. A postdoctoral fellow works for a particular professor and does his research. So we continued the research that we had done there together. But after a few years, the time was coming when I really ought to have been absorbed on some faculty somewhere. Well, about 6 years into this, which was really quite a long time, I was suddenly offered a position at the University of Illinois. And the professor who offered me that position was a double Nobel laureate in physics, the only one in the world who has that. We went and saw the place, and I went and saw the place. I was not particularly impressed by the city. It's in Urbana. And it was a huge department. And I had some misgivings because I'm not only a physicist. As you see, and as you've heard, I've used physics for other purposes. And I would have to burn midnight oil in order to compete in a place like that. At the same time, I didn't have a job at the time, a permanent job, and I was having, as I said, this was an offer from a double Nobel laureate, not an easy thing to refuse. RMC, where I work here, is a military college. It's a small college with 2,000 students. My first year class was all held in one room. I could meet them individually. I knew their first names. Over in Urbana, I would be teaching to a large classroom with additional TV rooms and so on. So where I am here, where I was here, was much more reminiscent of Ashram. At the same time, I was getting desperate because I didn't have a permanent teaching position. So I really had to choose. All of a sudden at this time, the government of Canada decided to make the Royal Military College, where I was working, into a bilingual institution. And of course, I knew French already. So here was an opportunity for the department to expand and for my job to come. So this gives you an example. I'm not saying that this was done only for my sake, but in every possible way, whenever we had choices, things would automatically happen in such a way that we may not always appreciate right away the benefits of that. It happened to us, for example, when we chose our place to live. We actually chose it without knowing all the benefits that came from living there, and things like that. That is what I meant with what I said there.
Thank you very much for the great example. And like, yeah, sometimes what confuses me is like when you have to take an immediate action on a decision, like, and you don't know if you're proceeding towards the right path, and you don't know from what basis you should take the action except your mind and the things that is telling you. So that's the confusion that, like,
Yes, but that happens too, because mother puts ideas into your head as well. As I said, I think, I sometimes talk to mother before I go to sleep. And next morning, I find that there are ideas which have come. So the idea that you've had before you did something, you may not immediately attribute it to the mother. You may think it was you who did it, but it may be an answer that has come from some request from you for mother's help. And it may be much later that you begin to realize how good that choice is.
If anyone else
Thank you for sharing your wonderful faith. Thank you.
Thank you, Dolan. If anyone else wants to open their camera.
Hi, Binu.
Yes.
Hi. From Jonathan and Alexandre.
Hi, Binu. We
Hello.
met you in Pondicherry.
Right.
We were
Yes.
there
How are you? How are you
in
both?
Pondicherry, Ashram in August.
Well, did I say
Good.
anything
Yeah, it
today?
was
I
such
hope
a
I
pleasure
did. I
to
don't
meet
know.
you.
So how are you keeping?
It's a pleasure to meet you and Maruma and your daughter.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good, good. It was special that we were on the same plane.
Yes, there's Roma
We
next
were
to
on the
me
same
here.
plane flight.
Oh, there's
There
That's
she
right.
is.
That's right.
Hello.
Yes, yes.
We
Nice
continue
to see you.
Yes. We're in the same family. Absolutely.
Oh,
So good to see you.
so yeah, we so enjoyed meeting you.
Yes.
It was nice, very nice to see you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'll give you a call.
Okay, yes.
Bye.
Hello,
Yes.
this is Maya. Hi,
Oh, hello, Ma.
how are you? How is Bontu?
She's right here.
Okay, how are you? Actually, I am good friends of Binu and Bontu. I am from New York, Maya Sarkar. And all these events, what Binu was describing, physically I was present in Pondicherry during their wedding. I hope you remember Binu.
Hello. Yes, thank you.
Do you remember I was there in
Yes, I
Pondicherry
remember you very well. Yes.
when your wedding took place?
Yes, and I remember you also because, in fact, the I mean, I knew about your family and all that. So yes,
Yeah, it was
Ruma had spoken to me about you.
yeah.
I visited you in New York.
Yes, and it was a very nice way of presenting your experience in Pondicherry, and thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
Okay, can you hear me, by the way?
Yes, I can hear you. Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thanks a lot for your speech. Okay.
Thank you.
Nice that you could join us, Maya, and we look forward to your visit again to Matagiri.
Okay, thank you.
Jonathan lived at Matagiri, and Maya's husband worked on SAM, who's
Yeah.
the founder. So we have lots of close relationships here. Anyone else with a question? Please
Okay.
raise your hand and open your camera and speak. Okay, we thank you all for your patience, for the apologies for the technical difficulties.
Yes, my apologies particularly, yes.
We did make a recording that, with your permission, we will share. Anyone else with a final question before we close? Theo, go ahead.
Well, I was moved by his comment about when you read Sri Aurobindo and the Mother, you don't have to understand it. And it kind of inspired me to invite this noble assembly to join the Madhugiri reading group, 5 p.m. Tuesday, Thursday, where you can read Savitri with us. And you don't have to understand it, but let it wash over you. The question I had was about if you could say a little more about your internal communications with the Mother and like receiving wisdom from her, and how you learned how to talk to her early. I thought that was really moving. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about that technique.
Well, two things. That is something that I cannot do it. It has to really come from your own aspiration, because Mother has to help you be able to do it. Sri Aurobindo has said very generally that we have to do nothing except open ourselves to Mother. She will do everything for us. And this is also that. As I told you, Mother said this would happen, and she has helped me to make it happen. But it comes as a result of your own aspiration, your own search for it. And this comment also applies to the earlier one. You mentioned the fact about reading without thinking. But you see, there's a very positive side to this, because Mother and Sri Aurobindo have said in that comment of mine, not asking for explanations is only one side. The positive side is that they have told us that they are working on us through our reading. And by our using our minds, we are stopping Mother, we are not giving her access to us. So in fact, that is a very positive thing that they said. We should not forget that. It is only by opening to them without the intervention of our mind coming in that they can accomplish what they have to do with us. One of the great, what shall I say, one of the great comforts of Sri Aurobindo's yoga is his statement that we have to make very little effort to make progress. Mother will do it all for us, but we have to allow her to do it. We should not prevent her from doing it. And by using and by putting our mind in between, this hampers them. So that is why we should try and read quietly without any mental, without the mind coming in between.
Thank you, Theo, for your question. Thank you, Binu. We so enjoyed our time together, and hopefully we can do it again. And thank everyone for participating. And I did put your email in the chat, and you can follow up with any particular questions. And very generous of you to offer, and we hope to see you again, either at Madhugiri or in Toronto.
Yes, thank you very much. We are all getting on in years now, so I don't know how much one can come, but I'll certainly be available on Zoom. It will be much easier. Yes, yes. And thank you for giving me the opportunity. Thank you.
All right. Take care, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of the Ashram day.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all for participating.
Thank you.